Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 33 of A Course in Miracles. I am so excited for tonight. We're going to open up with Kadeidra. Last week we talked about interacting with our extraterrestrial family. And Kadeidra was actually able to look at the documentary we referenced called Unacknowledged. So she is going to share her impressions of it with us. So I'm excited. So Kadeidra, what were your impressions of the documentary?
I had a lot of impressions. I do have three takeaways, but I did want to ask everyone, kind of what is your take on extraterrestrials? You don't have to, say who you are, but if you want to put in the chat that, you believe in them or you don't, or you have questions or any feelings that you have. I just wanted to see where everyone was. And the reason is because I saw this 2019 chart that stated that a third of Americans do believe and 60% do not. So that number was higher than I thought it would be. It was actually surprising to me, but yeah, I was happy to see that. Okay, so someone said they do believe here, and I didn't hear from anyone else, but we can continue. So basically, this documentary was released in 2017, and it really was a view into Dr. Stephen Greer's project. It's called, what is it called? The Disclosure Project. And what it does is it really discloses a lot of secret information and a lot of data that we, the people, are not aware of. And so my three main takeaways was, the first thing is that, what do you do when you want to hide something, right? When you want to not disclose something, you hide it in plain sight. So what do I mean by that? So if you think about your experience of extraterrestrial beings, and just in your life, how have you experienced them? Have they been in school? Have you learned about them in school? Have you read about them in magazines, the Time magazine? Or have you seen them in movies as these evil creatures? Well, E.T. wasn't evil, he was soft and fuzzy, but they can be portrayed, as attacking us or, being, devious. And so that's what they do. They allow this information about them to come out very purposefully, very strategically. They'll have it in tabloid magazines or have it in these movies, but that's really the only time you get to experience them freely. And that's not by coincidence. That's by design. So that was one takeaway. The second takeaway that I noted was that it's not even just the US, it's really governments all over the world, right? That have evidence, they have documentation and, proof that there is existence beyond Earth, but they don't share it. And so there's a lot of documentation and a lot of people that speak to that were former military people and people in other official roles in government that were like, no, this is something that I saw with my own eyes. So that's the second thing that stood out to me, was that there's people that are credible. These are not, conspiracy theorists. These are people that didn't believe until they saw it themselves. So that's the second thing that stood out to me. And then finally, I learned also that the government spends a lot of money, on these projects. They call them, I forgot what they call them, but there's just these projects that even the president is not privy to. And so it's a really, really unacknowledged part of our lives. And it's a huge part of our lives that we don't even know impacts us. And so I do encourage all of you to watch it. I do think that what's also unacknowledged, right, is our choice to believe or not. So right now we're essentially uninformed for the most part. And so by the government keeping this from us, we remain, deprived of our choice to believe. Give us the information, right? And then we can decide if we believe it or we don't. Now, everyone that watches this documentary is not going to believe it, and that's fine, but it's their right to choose. And so that's, that was another realization that I had. So yes, I definitely encourage you all to watch it. I'm not saying you're going to believe. I'm not saying you're not, but just get the information and then you can decide from there on your own. But it's important to know. So anybody had any thoughts or comments, questions?
Yeah, Charmaine said, she said it's on Hulu. She said she saw it and she said she believes.
Ooh, you saw it? Oh, wow. Yes. I'm so glad you saw it.
Yeah.
And Kadeidra, thank you for that. That is my experience of learning about extraterrestrials has been through the tabloids, like you said, where they make it seem as if people are crazy, like these crazies. You know, Hicktown people or people living on the outskirts of society, when they say that they've seen it, they paint the narrative that these are out of their mind, crazy people who live off the grid. It hasn't been able to be presented enough to us in a way that is legitimate. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is on purpose. And thank you so much for sharing your points on that. So if we don't have any other comments on that at this point, I'm going to get started with the session, and we could talk more about it too at the end. So if everybody can mute themselves, we are on lesson 33 of A Course in Miracles, and lesson 33 is there is another way of looking at the world. There's another way of looking at the world. So it says, today's idea is an attempt to recognize that you can shift your perception of the world in both its outer, right, what we see, and its inner aspects, what we experience within us. Then it says, today's idea should be made immediately when any situation arises which attempts you to become disturbed. Simply say, there's another way of looking at this. And I love this lesson because it opens up our perception. You know, it allows us to go higher than our feeling. Lesson 33 provides us an essential technique to take control of our thoughts and perceptions. There is another way of looking at the world. This statement opens up space for us to consider that there could be another way to perceive whatever content or situation that has risen. Instead of being upset, angry, or sad, this lesson invites us to have another thought about a particular situation. And even if we cannot shift the way we look at it, the essence of the statement allows us to say, I don't know what's another way I can look at this. This looks so dark. This looks so bad to me. But you know what? Let me trust God on this. Just let me trust God. I may not see a higher purpose. I may not see a reason, but let me trust God. So this is a powerful lesson. And I encourage everyone to be consistent in their daily study of A Course in Miracles, to just continue to study every day so that we can continue to shift and train our minds from fear and stress to love and joy. So to open up the session, y'all, I'm excited about tonight. I was speaking with a very effective and powerful psychic and life coach. And she was telling me that she has clients who represents all demographics of the population. She has older clients, younger clients. She has clients of all nationalities. Some of the people she coaches are wealthy and some are working class. So recently she shared with me that she coaches a pastor of a large church, and he complimented her guidance and told her that she has helped him tremendously, both in his personal and professional life. He continued by saying that he thinks that everyone would benefit from her life coaching, and that he wants to recommend her to all of his congregation. He feels like everyone should benefit from her counsel. So with that, he continued though. He said he thinks that everyone would benefit, but that he wants to recommend her, but there was only one issue. And he says she first needed to remove the word psychic from her title and remove it everywhere on her social media pages. And if she did that, he would put her on. And so after hearing this, I thought, why has the word psychic become such a curse word for many people? Why is it that some people even think that it's sacrilegious or even blasphemous? Where did this shadow come from that seems to follow the word psychic? So in my years of studying A Course in Miracles, Conversations with God, and countless other books that were channeled by spirit, I have come to learn that anything that is commonly shamed, discounted, and frowned upon is usually something very good. And that the powers that be would have us believe it is very bad. So I went to my trusted sources of information to research this concept of psychic abilities, which are actually beautiful gifts of God. So we're going to go to the source and see, where has this concept began, and is it erroneous for us to shy away from our psychic abilities? So I began to remember, didn't Jesus receive information from spirit when he walked the earth? Wasn't he told of things to come and given information from high vibrational spiritual energies? I'm going to begin by reading from Jesus, My Autobiography, that's channeled through Tina Spalding, which I love. So I love this book because, as previously stated in some of my other videos, specifically the one titled No Sacrifices Required, many stories were laid upon Jesus's life after he was killed. Many people brought forth versions of his life according to their own perceptions, interpretations, and motivations. So Jesus, My Autobiography was channeled through Tina Spalding because he wanted to share his own life in his own words. Jesus understands that, as we talked about last couple of weeks ago, that many people have been hurt by others using his name. And so this book is about Jesus taking his name back. So Jesus talks about the word psychic, and people receiving information from spirit. He talks about that on the first page of this book. He gets right into it. So I'm going to start right at the beginning because I want to make sure that we have context when we are discussing this topic. One thing that I often say about Jesus is that he never withholds information from us. He doesn't make us dig and solve puzzles and decipher dated language. He had to use parables during the time he was on the planet because he did not want to put the public in danger. But what I love about this book is that it is plain language. It's plain language. So I'm going to start on page 1, pages 1 through 2. So Jesus starts out and says, We wish to start at the beginning. We wish to start with my birth. My mother was informed in a dream that she would have me. She had a discussion in a very vivid and lively dream that told her that she would become pregnant, that she would have a child who would bring light to the world, and that the spirit of this child would come into this unborn baby and would live its life out as her son. She was told in this dream that she would be responsible for providing the foundational environment in which this being would live. She was told to teach it the Jewish ways, but she was also told to be very gentle and kind with this baby. She was told to love it unconditionally, to love it with all her heart, for it would need her love and it would have a challenging life at times because of its personality and its nature. This being who came to her in a dream is what you call an archangel, a being from a higher realm who has responsibilities to earth, who has chosen this, who is born into this job, so to speak. Archangels have assignments they are in charge of and beings they are in charge of. This archangel was in charge of my life, my transformation, and my education. I have spent much time with this being since passing over so many years ago. Back in that day, this being was able to communicate with my mother in a dream. My mother told my father about the dream, and he poo-pooed it a little bit, for he was in the male world of reason, judgment, and action. And then Jesus continues, he says, my mother was an intuitive and kind woman who was open to these other realms, as most women are. This is why you see more women in spiritual transformation groups than you do in other meetings. For women are more open to the non-physical. They are more receptive in nature. They are more fluid in nature. This is an important fact to bring to mind at this point, that my mother, not my father, was the one with whom communications could be made more easily. So now we read that Jesus' mother received information in a dream that she was going to have a child who would transform the world. He states that his mother was an intuitive and kind woman who was open to these other realms, as most women are, he says. He then states that that there were, okay, hold on, let me see. Because I haven't read that part, but let me continue. So he continues with deconstructing myths, because there's a point that I'm going to make that he says in here. He says, this is the beginning of the deconstruction of the idea that men play a more important role in the spiritual cultural interference or interface. This is not the case. Generally, he says, women play a much more important role in the transmission of information, the transmission of new information in particular, for they do not become so attached to the structures, the power, or the politics as men do. So this is my first insertion of blasphemy in this story. There will be many, we assure you. Okay, so he's going to continue, and I want to get to the point. It says, my mother spoke to this being, and was told that she would be giving birth to this child who would shine light on this world and transform things. My mother was prepared somewhat, but the tale of how three wise men were told of my coming did not come about in the sense of the story told in the Bible. This book that you study so much and believe is the word of God. There were indeed, this is the point, there were indeed shamans and esoteric students of spirituality who got this information just as any psychic would get such information. He says it was not unusual in that sense, for there are many beings who always receive spiritual information. So there was some knowledge in the villages and fields around where I was born. So it was some knowledge, he's saying, that he was coming, because they had shamans and esoteric spiritual people, and people who knew that someone would be born, but there was not a great fanfare at all. This was not a great shaking up of society at that point. It was merely a small news story that traveled through the spiritual realms. I was not important at that point. So the point that I wanted to make was that Jesus states that there were shamans and esoteric students of spirituality who got spiritual information. He says, just as any psychic would get. This, he says, was not unusual. This was not unusual. So the fact that we make the word psychic turn that into such a taboo thing, it is something that society has turned it into. This was like normal in Jesus's day. They understood that you received information from spirit. It was not a whole huge thing to be ashamed of or to gasp at or anything. Jesus also mentioned that many women are more open to receiving spiritual information because they are not as rigid. That's why I applaud the men that are a part of this spiritual community, and they are out there because you have set yourself apart to understand that there is more than what the eye can see. So I'm going to pick back up on Jesus, My Autobiography on page 34 through 35. And it says, I chatted with fellow workers as we unloaded bags of grain or pots of oil. And this was when Jesus started to travel. He says, and we would discuss their unhappiness, their dissatisfaction with life, or whatever it was that was troubling them. I offered them some counsel from the teachings I had gleaned from my religious studies and from my spiritual connection to the non-physical. I was always receiving information. I was always downloading truth from the non-physical. I had a wonderful connection to it, a connection that was clear and uncluttered. And as long as I stayed in a place of total acceptance and non-judgment, the channel stayed open. Jesus continues, he says, this was the information I was working on. I was not working on ordinary mind information. I was working on information that had been coming to me for many years. He says, despite my youth, I was mature beyond my physical years. And many people commented on this, on how mature I was, on how wise I was, and so on. Not to blow my own horn, but that was the case. I had been receiving information from the non-physical for a long time, and I knew much about the truth. I knew much about the principles of the mind and how it works. So Jesus references a lot about receiving information from non-physical beings. He says that as long as he kept his vibration high and was in a place of total acceptance and non-judgment, the channel stayed open. Jesus also talks about a connection to higher realms. He talks about this all throughout this book. I mean, there's too many references for me to read, but I'm gonna reference one more on page 60 to 61. Again, I'm reading from Jesus, My Autobiography, and starting on page 60, it says, when you raise your vibration and consider the spiritual, you can see yourself as a being who is manifested only partially in this physical realm and understands the true concept of your reality, which is that most of you is not manifested here. So he's basically saying most of us is not even here. Okay, we have 1 foot here in the physical realm and 1 foot in the spiritual realm. He continues, he says, you reside in a physical body, but it is not who you are. You can see that if you are kind to people, you will receive a kind of abundance in return that is not of the physical world. That if you are creative, you will tap into higher realms and these sorts of ideas, these sorts of concepts. If you understand that meditation connects you to a higher source of energy, then when you focus on these realities, that you are all connected, that love is all there is, you will tap into the spiritual mind and into the higher realms, and you will begin to get more information from there. He says, so you see, it is about what you believe. What you believe is true makes your world different. This is the underlying aspect of the teachings that I am bringing you. And I can clarify all of these subjects in much more detail, of course. So he goes into much more detail throughout the book. So Jesus is basically saying, listen, we all have access to this information as long as we stay in the high vibration of love and light. Now, this next reference really brings it home for us. I'm gonna read one more reference that it's gonna really bring it home for us. Jesus actually talks about, he actually uses the word channeling non-physical beings. I'm skipping to page 102. So on page 102, under the paragraph, healing the sick and performing miracles, Jesus says, I was able to look at a human, and we talked about this before in one of the other sessions. He says, I was able to look at a human and see his or her energetic body. And I was able to see where the restrictions was. And though this was not apparent to those beings watching me, he says, I was given information from non-physical beings about the thought processes that were at play with that being. That is what I shifted when I worked on healing people. I was connected to truth. I was connected to love through this connection to non-physical beings, beings from higher realms. I directed their energies, their wisdom, and their clarity through my body. Listen to this. This is page 102. Jesus says, I channeled their consciousness, and I could then shift in the person the thought processes that were causing the physical manifestation that came through as sickness. This is what was happening when I was healing people. I worked in concert with the non-physical beings who were my teachers, my guides, my mentors, and my gurus, if you will. He says, I have been developing this relationship throughout my life. As I mentioned previously, there were many communications that transpired before my enlightenment. So Jesus states that he used the word channel, which I love because we make this so taboo now. He says he channeled the consciousness of his guides and his teachers. This is what channeling is. This is what channeling is, to channel the consciousness of a non-physical being. This is what Tina Spalding does when she channels Jesus. This is what Margaret did when she channeled God a few weeks ago. And this is what Antoinette Fumos will do when she channels an extraterrestrial being for us in September. We can all channel high vibrational beings as long as we continue to forgive ourselves and others. Forgiveness and love are the two main ways to ensure that we keep a high vibration, and keeping a high vibration is critical to channeling high vibrational non-physical beings. You want to match their vibration. You want to raise your vibration from hatred and resentment and all those lower realms and raise them up to match the vibration of high vibrational non-physical beings. So this indictment on intuitive people is classic conditioning. It's a way to use shame and judgment to get people to shy away from their God-given gifts. Why would some people in positions of power shroud psychic abilities with this cloud of doubt and insecurity? Why would they do that? The answer to that question lies in my next question, which is, what if we all walked around like Jesus did, communicating directly with spirit? What if we all knew who we really were, that we are divine sparks of light from God to get wisdom and clarity straight from source? You couldn't tell us anything. Nobody could tell us anything. It would not be possible for us to be deceived by those with nefarious intentions. Of course, they do not want us to be able to communicate with spirit. Of course, they want to make it seem as if psychics are of the devil. Of course, that is the agenda that they would push, because then we could not be controlled. Then we could not be controlled. There is always a motivation behind every agenda that we see in this realm. There's always a motivation. So of course, I had to swing by and see what God had to say about psychic abilities, right? We got to get it straight from God. God, what you got to say? So I'm going to read from Conversations with God, book 1, and on page 204 through 205. So Neil says, I sometimes feel very psychic. Is there such a thing as being psychic? Am I that? Are people who claim to be psychic trafficking with the devil? Neil asked God. And so God says, yes, there is a such thing as being psychic. God says, you are that. Everyone is that. He says, there is not a person who does not have what you call psychic ability. There are only people who do not use it. So let's absorb that everyone has psychic ability, but there are only people who do not use it. He says using psychic ability is nothing more than using your sixth sense. He says, obviously, this is not trafficking with the devil, or I would not have given this sense to you. So there's the acknowledgement that this gift does come from God. He says, and of course, there is no devil with whom to traffic. And then he says he'll explain later in future books. So then when he told Neil, I'll explain later in future books. I'm like, okay, well, let me look at the other books. So then I go to Conversations with God, book 3 on page 122, where they talk a little bit more about psychic abilities. So Neil says, this brings up another subject I wanted to discuss. And God says, I know. And Neil says, you know. And God says, of course, you want to discuss psychics. And Neil says, how did you know? And God says, I'm psychic. And so Neil says, hey, I'll bet you are. You're the mother of all psychics. You're the chief honcho, the top banana, the big cheese. You're the man, the boss, the unit, the chairman of the board. And God says, my man, you have got it right. And Neil says, give me 5. And God says, cool, brother, right on. So look, right, they having a moment. They having the whole, God and Neil are having the whole moment right now. It's in Conversations with God, book 3, page 102, if you don't believe me. So after they get past that, Neil says, so what I want to know is, what is psychic power? And God says, you all have what you call psychic power. He says, it is truly a sixth sense. So he repeats that. And you all have a sixth sense about things. He says, psychic power is simply the ability to step out of your limited experience into a broader view, to step back, to feel more than what the limited individual you have imagined yourself to be would feel, to know more than he or she would know. It is the ability to tap into the larger truth all around you, to sense a different energy. And so Neil says, how does one develop this ability? And God says, develop is a good word. It's sort of like muscles. You all have them, yet some of you choose to develop them, whereas in others, they remain undeveloped and far less useful. To develop your psychic muscle, you must exercise it, use it every day, all the time. So God is like, exercise this muscle, use it every day, use it all the time. He said, right now the muscle is there, but it's small, it's weak, it's underused. So you'll get an intuitive hit. He has, in quotes, you'll get an intuitive hit now and then, but you won't act on it. You'll get a hunch about something, but you'll ignore it. You'll have a dream or an inspiration, but you'll let it pass, paying it scant attention. And God continues, he says, thank goodness you did pay attention to the hit you had about this book, or you wouldn't be reading these words now. You think you came to these words by accident, by chance? So the first step in developing psychic power is to know you have it and to use it. Pay attention to every hunch you have, every feeling you feel, every intuitive hit you experience. Pay attention. Then act on what you know. Don't let your mind talk you out of it. Don't let your fear pull you away from it. The more that you act on your intuition fearlessly, the more your intuition will serve you. It was always there, only now you're paying attention to it. And so Neil says, but I'm not talking about like the always finding a parking space kind of psychic ability. I'm talking about real psychic power, the kind that sees into the future, the kind that lets you know things about people you have no way of knowing otherwise. And God says, that's what I'm talking about too. And Neil says, how does this psychic power work? Should I listen to people who have it? If a psychic makes a prediction, can I change it? Or is my future set in stone? How can some psychics tell things about you the minute you walk into the room? And then Neil says, what if? And God says, wait, that's 4 different questions there. Let's slow down a bit and try one at a time. So God says, there are 3 rules of psychic phenomena that will allow you to understand how psychic power works. Let's go over them. He says, first, all thoughts is energy. That's number 1. He says, number 2, all things are in motion. And then he says, number 3, all time is now. Psychics are people who have opened themselves to the experiences these phenomena produce. Vibrations, sometimes formed as pictures in the mind, sometimes a thought in the form of a word. The psychic becomes adept at feeling these energies. This may not be easy at first because these energies are very light, very fleeting, very subtle, like the slightest breeze on a summer night that you think you felt rustle through your hair, but maybe didn't. Like the faintest sound in the furthest distance that you think you heard, but can't be sure. Like the dimmest flicker of an image at the corner of your eye that you swore was there. But when you look head on, it's gone, vanished. Was it there at all? That's the question the beginning psychic is always asking. The accomplished psychic, he says, never asks, because to ask the question, listen to this, this is cool. He says to ask the question sends the answer away. Asking the question engages the mind. And that's the last thing a psychic wants to do. He said, intuition does not reside in the mind. To be psychic, you've got to be out of your mind because intuition resides in the psyche, in the soul. Intuition is the ear of the soul. The soul is the only instrument sensitive enough to pick up life's faintest vibrations, to feel these energies, to sense these waves in the field, and to interpret them. You have 6 senses, not 5. They are your sense of smell, taste, touch, sight, hearing, and knowing. So here is how psychic power works. He says, every time you have a thought, it sends off an energy. It is energy. The soul of the psychic picks up that energy. The true psychic will not stop to interpret it, but will probably just blurt out what that energy feels like. That's how a psychic can tell you what you're thinking. Every feeling you've ever had resides in your soul. Your soul is the sum total of all your feelings. It is a repository. Even though it may have been years since you've stored them there, a psychic who is truly open can feel these feelings here and now. That's because he says all together now, and he and Neil says there's no such thing as time. So, and we've talked about that, how there's no such thing as time. So we just received a lesson in what psychic powers are. But the point is, would God be explaining a gift of his to us if it were of evil or the devil or bad? Or would he refer to himself as something that is evil or bad? No, he would not. I wanted to close out by saying that when Jesus was explaining that women were and are open to receiving information from non-physical beings, it reminds me of the gruesome history of the Salem witch trials, where many women and men suffered torturous deaths, where they were burned at the stakes, hung, and beheaded as a result of baseless accusations of being witches. Many of us were killed because we were shamans. We were spiritual healers. We saw things in past lifetimes. And now the energies of this planet are less rigid, and there is room for folks to share their God-given spiritual talents. For many lifetimes, our souls have yearned to freely express your abilities in this realm without fear. I understand that there are even religious people who are reluctant to meditate. Why would it be dangerous or taboo to go within yourself? That's all meditation is to go within. What is the subconscious assertion behind the belief that we must not go within, that it is dangerous for us to silence ourselves and check out our inner universe? This reluctance to meditation, this reluctance to go within is fueled by the belief of feeling that we are innately bad. This is not true. We are beautiful beings of light who are made of love, from love, for love. There's nothing bad about us. So now is the time to develop and share the gifts that you were blessed with. Let's not cower under religious conditioning that demonizes our high vibration in an effort to control us. Now is the time to be unapologetically authentic to who you are. My question to everyone on this call is, how comfortable are you in developing your psychic muscles? Charmaine, I know that you consistently develop your intuition. What are some ways or tools that you have used to strengthen your connection with spirit?
Mm-hmm. Oh, hi, Elle. Thank you so
Hi.
much. um, this session was powerful, and everything that you said
Thank you.
is pretty much true to me, as far as developing intuition.
Yeah.
So I just thank you just for the message today. It was really powerful.
You're welcome.
So yeah, you're welcome. Um, so like you said, your question was just like
Yeah, what tools, how have you strengthened your intuitive abilities? How have you, what tools have you used? What methods have you used to do that?
Well, initially, sometimes, psychic things will come to you without you asking for it. Um, like dreams, and you just have those hunches, like you said. So sometimes, like you said, the tool is your sixth sense. Sometimes you don't have a tool per se initially, but like you mentioned, the tools I have used, um, so I guess help to read people, because in psychic phenomenon. But the tools I've used, it's just tarot cards, and creating your own numbers, and practicing intuition. um I used to have my kids, we used to have like this statue at the table that had the mother, the father, and the son. So we'll practice telepathy. And I said, what person am I thinking of? And at first it was just playful, but at some point, um, the accuracy was kind of there. I'm like, yes, I'm thinking of the father. Yes, I'm thinking of the child. So practicing mental telepathy, just walking around your house like, hey, I'm in the kitchen. There's 4 objects. What do you think? Which one am I thinking of? So it's just a way to exercise it and things like that.
Yeah,
I guess
thank
that's pretty
you.
much it. Cars and things like that. Just to share so much, but
Thank
I've been
you.
doing this so many years that it just, you get messages all over the place at a certain point. But that's all. I don't want to talk too much.
Thank you, Charmaine. No, that's cool. The using the father and the son and the different symbols and doing the telepathy. That's cool. Like Brittany says, wow, that's so cool. Does anybody else? I do this thing where I practice, like if I receive a phone call or a text message before I see who it is, I'll try to say, guess in my head, like, okay, who is it? Like try to guess before you see who it is, to kind of build that muscle as well. So yeah, thank you. Just trying to share some ideas. I think the biggest thing is for us to not cower or shy away from our gifts, to not think that it's something to be ashamed of, or it's against God. That's not true. We see right here that Jesus talked at length about channeling spirits and receiving information from non-physical beings. It's us that put that taboo on that, and that taboo it's a form of conditioning, and there's a purpose behind them wanting us to be afraid of those abilities. So that's my session tonight. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to share before we close out?
I have a question.
Okay.
So the woman that was asked to remove psychic from all of her credentials that were public, what did she do?
The last I talked to her, she was mulling it over, and of course she's faced with, this is a part of my work, right? It's almost like having to deny a part of who you are, to accommodate someone. So I don't know what she decided, but she was, kind of mulling it over in her head. So we'll see. But I thought that was an odd request, Hey, Margaret.
Hi, that was a very odd request.
Yeah, right.
For me, I don't really do anything to really develop psychic. As I explained, how this came upon me was as much a surprise to me as anyone. I don't really practice anything. Maybe I should start practicing stuff, as you said, to strengthen that muscle. But for now, I just talk to God all day.
Yes. Well, that's the way.
That's what I have to say.
Thank you for sharing that, Margaret. I think the biggest thing God was saying is when you see something, like I would see stuff like in the corner of my eyes, and he was saying as soon as you question it, it's like
Yes.
because you start bringing it to the mind.
Yeah.
And so now I'm just starting to, okay, I saw something. I don't know if it was a fairy or a spirit, but validating that, I saw that. So I've been practicing that instead of going into the head. But it's after 8, and thank y'all so much for joining. Y'all are beautiful. Thank you so much for being flexible with me about the time. And I love you. And this was incredible.